She had $10.37 when she outbid nobody for property the county had been trying to unload since 2008. The listing appeared on a government auction website between a seized 1997 Honda Civic and a commercial ice machine from a failed restaurant in Pocatello. Zero bids, zero interest, the kind of real estate that made county assessors sigh and mark files with notes about tax revenue they would never collect. The property sat 14 miles from the nearest paved road in the Salmon Chalice National Forest, accessible only by a Forest Service road closed to vehicles October through June, and a foot trail that climbed over a 7,200-foot pass. No electricity, no running water, no septic system, no phone service. The nearest town was Stanley, Idaho, population 116, an hour's drive from the trailhead if the roads cooperated and the weather held. The county had condemned the structure in 1973, the same year it reverted from a 50-year Forest Service lease back to local tax rolls. For 52 years the building had stood empty while property tax bills accumulated in a filing cabinet at the Custer County Courthouse. Nobody wanted it. Nobody could use it. Nobody could figure out how to make it worth the hassle of ownership. Rebecca Torres wanted it anyway. At 21, she understood that the things nobody else wanted were the only things she could afford. She had learned this lesson the way people learn most important lessons, through necessity, rather than choice through elimination, rather than preference through the slow accumulation of closed doors until only one door remained, and walking through it felt less like decision and more like inevitability. What she found locked inside a metal cabinet that had not been opened since June of 1971 was enough cash to change everything about her circumstances. But the letter she found beside the money would change something deeper than circumstances. It would change what she believed about trust, about inheritance, about whether the world operated on rules or on something else entirely. Something that had no name but felt like the opposite of randomness. Before any of that, though, there was a childhood spent tracing blank spaces on maps. Rebecca, at 8 years old, sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor of a ranch house in a Spokane suburb where nothing ever happened and nothing was supposed to happen. The road atlas lay open across her lap, spine cracked from years of use, pages soft at the edges from handling. Her finger traced the green spaces, national forests, wilderness areas, state parks, the places that did not belong to anybody, which meant in some deeper sense they belonged to everybody, which meant in the most practical sense they belonged to anyone willing to walk far enough to reach them. Her mother Linda stood at the kitchen counter, sorting bills from the agricultural supply company where she worked as a bookkeeper. Numbers governed Linda's life, debits and credits, payables and receivables, the precise mathematics of staying afloat when afloat was the best outcome available. Linda glanced at her daughter. The question came gently, without judgment, the way questions come when you have asked them before and received answers that made sense to the person giving them, even if they made no sense to anyone else. What are you doing looking at where I am going to live someday? Linda smiled in the way parents smile when children say things that reveal how completely children misunderstand how the world actually works. She returned to her bills. Rebecca returned to her maps. The misunderstanding, though, belonged to Linda. Rebecca's father had left when she was 4. She retained no memory of him, no face, no voice, no moment of departure, just the knowledge that there had been 2 adults once, and now there was one, and the one who remained worked long hours to pay for a house that felt too big and too quiet and too organized, as if organization could substitute for the chaos that a complete family generates. Linda raised her alone in that suburb where neighbor children played organized sports and attended birthday parties and accumulated friends the way their parents accumulated lawn care equipment. Rebecca participated in none of it. She read books about expeditions instead. She read about people who built cabins in Alaska and lived on what they could hunt and gather. She read Jack London by age 12, every story the brutal ones about freezing and starving and dying in the wilderness because you miscalculated by 1 day or 1 degree or one decision. She carried a copy of Walden in her backpack throughout high school, though she never finished it. Thoreau pleased himself too much. His self-sufficiency felt performative, as if he had walked to his cabin to prove something to people rather than to escape them. Rebecca wanted to escape them. She started camping alone at 14. The first time she took a city bus to a trailhead 40 minutes from her house. She carried a borrowed backpack loaded with gear purchased at garage sales and thrift stores, a sleeping bag that smelled like someone else's basement, a tarp instead of a tent because tents cost money, a water filter she had saved for across 3 months of allowance, a paperback guide to edible plants that she studied the way other students studied for exams that mattered. Linda discovered the camping after Rebecca returned from the first trip. The argument was brief. Linda had learned years earlier that arguing with Rebecca was like arguing with geology. Positions shifted over centuries, not conversations. You could get hurt out there. I know how to take care of myself. You are 14 years old. Thoreau was younger when he started thinking about this. Thoreau had a family who could come find him if he got lost. Rebecca said nothing to that. The silence was answer enough. Linda let it go. By 17, Rebecca had hiked over 800 miles of trail in Washington and Idaho. Most of it alone. Most of it off established trails, because established trails meant other hikers, and other hikers meant conversation, and conversation meant explaining, and Rebecca had nothing she wanted to explain. The Wonderland Trail around Mount Rainier. Sections of the Pacific Crest Trail where it crossed through old-growth forest. Segments of the Idaho Centennial Trail where the guidebook warned of grizzly bears, and Rebecca walked anyway because warnings about bears felt less threatening than warnings about college applications and career planning and figuring out what normal people did with their lives. She kept journals, not the kind of journals that recorded feelings and personal growth. Technical journals, GPS coordinates, elevation gains, weather patterns, water sources, mistakes made and corrections applied, which plants were edible in which seasons, how to identify animal tracks in mud versus snow, how to navigate by stars when clouds obscured the moon. At 16, she completed a wilderness first responder certification through a community college weekend course. $485 she had saved from a summer job cleaning vacation rentals. The course taught her how to splint fractures, treat hypothermia, evacuate unconscious patients from backcountry locations where helicopter rescue was impossible or hours away. She learned these skills the way other students learn to drive cars, as preparation for independence, as tools for the life she intended to build. Her high school geography teacher, a man named Mr. Kowalski, recognized something in her that other teachers missed or ignored. He had served in Vietnam in a capacity he never specified, but which left him with a permanent limp, and a tendency to stare at topographic maps the way other people stared at photographs of places they used to live. He lent Rebecca maps from his personal collection. He taught her land navigation with compass and protractor. He showed her how to calculate declination, how to triangulate position using distant peaks, how to read terrain by contour intervals. The mountains do not negotiate. His voice carried the weight of experience that had cost something. Come prepared or do not come. When Rebecca graduated, he gave her his old Brunton compass, military surplus, brass and glass and precision. She carried it in her pack from that day forward. Linda died in March when Rebecca was 19. The diagnosis came fast. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The oncologist at Swedish Medical Center in Seattle delivered the news in a consultation room designed to absorb bad news, all soft surfaces and muted colors, and a box of tissues on every horizontal surface. Linda sat upright in the chair. Rebecca sat beside her. The words landed like stones in deep water, creating ripples that spread outward but made no sound. 6 weeks, the doctor said. Maybe 8, with treatment. Treatment would not cure it. Treatment would only delay. Linda chose treatment anyway, not because she believed it would work, but because choosing nothing felt like giving up. And Linda had not given up on anything in her life and was not going to start with her own death. The hospital social worker asked Rebecca during the 2nd week of admission whether there was other family to call. Rebecca said no. The social worker made a note on her clipboard and moved on to discharge planning, as if planning discharge for a patient who would not survive long enough to be discharged made sense in some administrative universe where paperwork mattered more than reality. What the social worker did not know was that Linda had sold her car 2 weeks before the diagnosis to pay for experimental treatment that insurance had categorized as investigational and therefore not covered. Rebecca found the receipt in her mother's purse after the funeral. $12,000 for a 1998 Toyota Camry with 190,000 miles. The money had gone to a clinic that promised immunotherapy and delivered 6 infusions of something that made Linda vomit for 3 days straight before the cancer continued growing anyway. Linda died on a Tuesday in April. Rebecca was the only person in the room. Hospice had moved Linda home for the final week because dying at home cost less than dying in a hospital, and Linda's insurance had stopped paying for anything that was not actively preventing death. And once death became inevitable, the insurance stopped paying entirely. The last words Linda spoke were not "I love you" or "I am sorry," or any of the things people say in movies when they die with time to prepare. The last words were, "You are going to be fine. You know how to take care of yourself." Then she stopped breathing, and Rebecca sat beside the bed for an hour before calling anyone, because once you called someone, the machinery of death started moving, and people arrived and took the body away. And you had to answer questions and sign papers and make decisions about things that did not matter, because the only thing that mattered was already gone. Rebecca did not cry at the funeral. She walked into the North Cascades wilderness for 5 days alone. When she came back, she was different in ways she could not name but could feel. The medical debt totaled $47,000. Rebecca's name appeared as next of kin on admission papers. She had signed without reading because you sign what hospitals tell you to sign when your mother is dying, and reading seems like a waste of time that could be spent sitting beside her bed. The debt became Rebecca's debt automatically, legally, irreversibly. The estate sale of Linda's belongings generated $1,840. The house had been rented, the furniture was cheap, the possessions were few. Rebecca kept three things: her mother's wool sleeping bag, a photograph of Linda at age 30, looking happy in a way Rebecca had never seen her look in life, and the road atlas with the cracked spine. She filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy in King County, Washington in April. Mull, age 19. The legal aid attorney who helped her fill out the forms said bankruptcy at 19 was unusual but not unheard of, and medical debt was the most common cause, and the court would discharge everything except student loans, which Rebecca did not have because she had never gone to college, because college required money and planning and a belief that credentials mattered more than competence. The bankruptcy became important later. It established legal standing. It created a record. It proved that Rebecca Torres, at age 19, had owned nothing and owed everything, and had chosen the legal remedy available to people in that position, which was to admit insolvency and start over. Starting over meant homelessness. March 2022 to October 2023. 19 months. Rebecca moved through a series of temporary arrangements that never felt temporary while she was living them, but in retrospect seemed like preparation for something else, as if the universe was teaching her how to carry everything she owned on her back, how to sleep anywhere, how to distinguish between things she needed and things she had been told she needed. She picked apples in Wenatchee for $12 an hour. She slept in the orchard in her mother's sleeping bag because the labor camp charged rent, and Rebecca had learned that paying for shelter reduced the amount of money she could save toward not needing shelter. She worked at a youth hostel in Seattle for $8 an hour, plus a bed in a shared dormitory room. She washed dishes and cleaned bathrooms and changed sheets and listened to travelers from other countries talk about how they were finding themselves, as if finding yourself required a plane ticket and a backpack and a gap year funded by parents who could afford to send their children away to discover things about themselves they could have discovered at home for free. She worked a 90-day contract on a Forest Service trail crew in the Cascade Range. GS3 federal wage scale, $14.35 per hour. The crew leader was a woman named Stephanie Harris, 34 years old, who had spent a decade on trails and had the kind of competence that came from repetition and the kind of patience that came from recognizing that competence took time. The Forest Service does not care that you love trees. Stephanie's voice carried no judgment, only information. They care if you show up on time and do the work correctly. Rebecca showed up on time. She did the work correctly. She learned to swing a Pulaski axe for 8 hours without stopping. She learned to build water bars that would still be working 10 years later. She learned to clear fallen trees from trails using a crosscut saw because chainsaws required certification, and Rebecca had not been there long enough to certify. Stephanie mentioned during a lunch break in July that the Forest Service occasionally sold surplus property. Administrative buildings they no longer needed. Fire lookouts in locations where aerial surveillance had replaced ground observation. Ranger stations in areas where district consolidation had made multiple stations redundant. Most of it sells at auction for real money. Stephanie ate her sandwich methodically, efficiently, the way she did everything. But sometimes stuff sits in legal limbo, county tax sales. Nobody bids because nobody can figure out how to use it. Rebecca filed that information away without knowing why it mattered. When the 90-day contract ended in September, Stephanie gave Rebecca her phone number and said if she ever needed anything to call. Rebecca called in October to ask for $500. Stephanie asked what for. Rebecca explained about the ranger station, about the auction, about the 14-mile walk into mountains, where nobody else wanted to go. Stephanie sent the money the next day. Rebecca wrote a formal promissory note. 0% interest. Repayment when able. Stephanie said the note was unnecessary. Rebecca said it was necessary to her. The property listing appeared on a public library computer in Coeur d'Alene on an October afternoon when Rebecca had been couch surfing for a week at the apartment of someone she had worked with at the hostel, someone who had said she could stay as long as she needed, but whose tone when saying it made clear that as long as she needed was not actually as long as she needed. Rebecca browsed GSA auctions because browsing was free and because looking at things she could not afford had become a habit, born from understanding that someday affordable and currently affordable were different categories, and the path between them required knowing what existed. The listing appeared under County Tax Foreclosure Sales, Custer County, Idaho. The thumbnail photograph showed a log cabin with a metal roof and a covered porch surrounded by lodgepole pines. The description was minimal. Former USFS Salmon River District Ranger Station, parcel number 47-2891, 0.8 acres. Legal description: inholding within. Salmon Chalice National Forest boundaries. Historical homesteaded 1889, deeded to Forest Service 1927. Lease expired 1973, reverted to county. Buyer responsible for all back property taxes. Minimum bid $10. Rebecca clicked through to the detailed listing. Back taxes calculated to $340 annually since 2008. 15 years. $5,100 owed immediately upon purchase. Required certified check, in-person appearance at county auction, 30-day escrow. She spent the next 2 hours at the library researching Idaho Revised Statute Title 63, which governed property tax sales. She took notes in a spiral notebook. She learned that county tax sales transferred clear title, that buyer assumed all responsibility for bringing taxes current, that failure to pay resulted in reforeclosure. She learned that properties with access issues or structural problems or legal encumbrances often failed to attract bids and sold for minimum amounts because minimum amounts were better than continued non-payment. Her checking account held $10.37. Stephanie's $500 would arrive by wire transfer within 2 business days. The auction was scheduled for November 4th. The math was simple: $10 for the bid, $5,100 for the back taxes, $400 for a bus ticket and supplies. That left negative $10, and she would need to eat. She called Stephanie and asked for $500 more. Stephanie asked if she was sure about this. Rebecca said she had never been sure about anything. Stephanie said that was not actually an answer. Rebecca said it was the only answer she had. The second $500 arrived on November 1st. Rebecca took a Greyhound from Coeur d'Alene to Stanley. 11 hours, $73. The bus smelled like diesel fuel and industrial cleaning solvent and the particular exhaustion of people who traveled by bus because they had no other options. Stanley appeared out of mountain landscape the way towns in the West appear when there is no gradual transition between wilderness and civilization, when one moment there is nothing and the next moment there are buildings clustered around a highway intersection, as if someone had decided arbitrarily that this location was slightly less impossible than the location surrounding it. The Sawtooth Diner occupied a single-story building with a gravel parking lot and a neon sign that said, "Open," in red letters. Rebecca walked in because it was the only place open and because she needed to ask someone where the county courthouse was, and because hunger had become something she noticed but no longer responded to automatically. The woman behind the counter was 62 years old with gray hair pulled into a practical bun, and the kind of face that had seen enough weather and enough people to distinguish between the two categories. Her name tag said, "Carol." "You, the girl who bought Hendrix's place?" Rebecca stopped. "I have not bought it yet. The auction is tomorrow." Carol poured coffee without asking whether Rebecca wanted coffee. Thought that property would sit empty till doomsday. Thomas built it strong. Forest Service tried burning it down twice for training exercises. Would not catch fire. Man knew how to build. You knew of him. He came to town twice a month for supplies while he was stationed up there. Quiet. Always ordered the same thing. Black coffee, scrambled eggs, wheat toast. Tipped exactly 20%. Never talked about himself. What happened to him? Died in Alaska in 1989. Heart attack. He was 59. Heard he was working a fire lookout tower up there when it happened. Carol refilled the coffee cup Rebecca had not yet emptied. That cabin has been sitting empty 34 years. If you are serious about living there, you should know it is not close to anything. 14 miles is 14 miles when you are carrying supplies. Winter up there starts in October and does not end till May. I know. People say they know. Then they try it and realize knowing and doing are different. Rebecca had no response to that. Carol pushed a menu across the counter. "Eat something. You look like you have been living on air." Rebecca ordered scrambled eggs and toast because that was what Thomas had ordered, and because making different choices felt presumptuous. The eggs arrived hot and the toast was buttered, and Rebecca ate methodically, forcing herself to chew slowly because her body wanted to consume everything immediately, and consuming everything immediately led to nausea. Carol did not charge her. When Rebecca protested, Carol waved her off. "Consider it a loan. Pay it back when you can." This was how communities worked in small towns. Informal credit systems based on trust that assumed people would still be around long enough to repay. Rebecca intended to be around. She spent 3 days in Stanley preparing. The Forest Service Ranger District Office required notification for winter backcountry travel. Rebecca filled out the form. Expected departure date, November 7th. Expected return, none. The ranger behind the desk, a young man who looked fresh out of college, raised his eyebrows at that, but said nothing. He filed the form. The county sheriff's office required a travel plan for anyone entering federal wilderness in winter. Rebecca filed the plan. The deputy who took the information asked whether she had experience. Rebecca listed her certifications, her trail miles, her previous winter trips. The deputy made notes and said if she did not check in by radio within 30 days, they would assume she was fine and stop tracking her. Stanley General Store carried basic supplies. Rebecca bought 40 pounds of flour, 20 pounds of rice, 10 pounds of dried beans, salt instant coffee, D batteries for her headlamp, first aid kit, refills waterproof matches, 2 propane canisters. $186. She packed everything into her backpack using compression sacks and weight distribution techniques Stephanie had taught her. The loaded pack weighed 65 pounds. Rebecca weighed 118 pounds. She was carrying 55% of her body weight. This was too much. She knew it was too much. She cached 20 pounds of supplies in a bear canister at the trailhead, hidden behind a boulder marked with GPS coordinates she recorded in her notebook. She would retrieve it on a second trip if she survived the first trip. The bus route from Coeur d'Alene to Stanley followed Highway 75 through the Sawtooth Valley. Mountains rose on both sides, granite peaks already white with snow in early November. The Salmon River ran parallel to the road, water the color of green glass over stones that had been smoothed by 10,000 years of current. Rebecca watched the landscape through the bus window and thought about how the same water that carved those stones had also carved the valley, had carved the entire basin. And the carving had taken so long that calling it carving was misleading, because carving implied intention and rivers had no intention, only persistence. The journey to the cabin required 2 days. Day 1 covered 8 miles of Forest Service road that climbed 1,400 feet through stands of lodgepole pine and aspen. The road had been closed to vehicles since October, but the snow was not yet deep enough to require snowshoes. Rebecca walked at a steady pace 1.5 miles per hour, the rhythm Stephanie had taught her for long-distance load carrying. She crossed 2 creeks on log bridges. At each bridge, she stopped to filter water and rest her shoulders where the pack straps cut in. She passed an abandoned Forest Service work site. The equipment had been locked in a shed for winter. She passed an old burn scar from a fire that had happened decades earlier. The dead trees stood silver gray against the green of new growth coming up around their bases. Temperature dropped as the sun set. Rebecca camped at the base of the pass in a flat clearing beside a frozen creek. She ate a cold dinner because lighting a fire required energy she needed to conserve for tomorrow's climb. Cheese and dried fruit and water she had boiled at the last creek crossing. The stars emerged one by one as darkness completed itself. Rebecca lay in her sleeping bag and watched them and thought about how the light from those stars had traveled for years or centuries to reach this valley, and how the light arriving now showed what those stars had looked like in the past, not what they looked like in the present, and how looking at anything distant meant looking into history. She slept the heavy sleep of someone whose body had been working all day. When she woke at dawn, frost covered the outside of her sleeping bag thick enough to leave white streaks on her hands when she touched it. Her breath made clouds in the cold air. The eastern sky behind the granite ridge was the color of pale rose, then gold, then blue. Day 2 required climbing 6 miles of trail to the 7,200-foot pass. The trail switchbacked up a north-facing slope that still held patches of late-season snow in shaded sections. Rebecca kicked steps where she had to. She used her trekking poles for balance. Her left ankle, which she had twisted slightly on a creek crossing the previous afternoon, throbbed with each step. She had wrapped it with an elastic bandage, but wrapping only stabilized it, did not heal, and each time her boot flexed, the joint pain spiked up her calf. Stopping was not an option. Stopping meant making camp on an exposed slope with no water source and no flat ground. Stopping meant spending a night at altitude where temperature would drop below zero and wind would make zero feel like something worse. The pass was 2 miles ahead. The cabin was 4 miles beyond the pass. She could make it if she kept moving. The pass at 7,200 feet was a narrow gap between two granite peaks where wind always blew because wind had nowhere else to go when it hit the Continental Divide. Rebecca reached it just after noon. She stood in the wind and looked back the way she had come and forward the way she was going. In both directions she saw nothing but mountains, no roads, no buildings, no power lines, just rock and snow and sky that went on until the curvature of the earth made further seeing impossible. This was what she had been looking at on maps since she was 8 years old. This was the blank space. This was where the roads ended and the wilderness began, and the only people who came here were people who had reasons that made sense to them, even if those reasons made no sense to anyone else. Have you ever wanted something so badly you would risk everything for it? Rebecca was hiking into winter mountains with a swelling ankle and a pack that weighed half her body weight and $3 in her pocket after paying for supplies. She had $10 worth of property ahead of her and nothing behind. Turning back meant sleeping in a Seattle hostel at 21 with no future in sight. Going forward meant gambling that a dead man's letter was real, and that mountains kept promises, and that wanting something hard enough made it possible. She descended through a long valley of lodgepole pine and aspen. The aspens were bare this late in the year, but their bark held the pale green color that aspens carry even in winter, as if storing sunlight for seasons when sunlight became scarce. The trail was easier here, the slope gentler, the footing dry. She made good time despite her ankle because downhill required less energy than uphill, and because knowing the destination was close created its own momentum. By mid-afternoon, she was walking through subalpine meadows where the snow had melted, and the ground was soft with the kind of soil that forms in places where plants grow and die and decompose for centuries without disturbance. She saw tracks, elk, deer, something smaller that might have been pine marten or weasel. The tracks were recent. This morning, maybe yesterday, the animals were close. She arrived at the ranger station just before sunset. The cabin sat in a small clearing on a flat shelf of land above a creek. Dark-stained logs, single story, steep green metal roof designed to shed snow. A covered porch fronted the south side. A stone chimney rose from the west wall. 3 windows on the front, 2 on each side. A simple wooden door painted faded brown, with a small carved wooden sign above it. The lettering on the sign was too weathered to read. Behind the cabin, partially visible through trees, stood a tall wooden fire lookout tower. It leaned slightly, but still stood. About 60 feet tall, with a small enclosed cab at the top and a switchback ladder running up the side. The tower had been part of the same complex used by the ranger to spot fires in the surrounding wilderness before aerial surveillance replaced ground-based observation. Rebecca stood at the edge of the clearing and looked. The light was the color of late copper. The lodgepole pines stood tall and straight, their lower trunks bare for the first 20 feet, the way lodgepoles always grew, reaching for sun. A cold breeze came down off the ridge and made the tops of the trees move slowly in unison, a long wave that traveled the length of the clearing and disappeared into forest beyond. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called. The sound carried impossibly far in the thin mountain air. This was it. This was the place she had been looking at on maps for 13 years. This was the blank space made real. She walked to the cabin door. The porch boards creaked under her boots. She tried the handle. Locked. The lock was old, and the wood around it was soft. When she put her shoulder against the door and pushed firmly, the latch gave with a small splintering sound, and the door swung inward. Guilt arrived immediately. The first thing she did was break in. She promised herself she would fix it properly. Inside was a single large room. The floor was rough-cut pine planks, dark with age, but solid. The walls were the same dark logs as the exterior. The chinking between them was mostly intact, only a few gaps near the corners where the daubing had crumbled. The ceiling was open to the rafters, with a loft area at one end accessible by a ladder. A stone fireplace dominated the west wall. Its mantel was rough-cut from a single piece of timber. The hearth was made of flat creek stones fitted together. Beside the fireplace stood an old wood-cook stove, cast iron, surface rusted, but the firebox looked intact. Furniture had been left behind. A heavy wooden table in the center of the room with 2 chairs. A simple cot frame against the back wall. A bookshelf along the east wall, empty now, but still standing. A small writing desk under one of the front windows. A coat rack by the door with 3 iron hooks. Everything was covered in dust. Everything looked exactly as it had when the last ranger walked out in 1971. In the corner of the room, beside the bookshelf, stood a metal cabinet. Gray steel, 4 feet tall, 2 doors with a built-in lock. Government property stamped with a faded inventory number SH1847. Rebecca was too exhausted to explore further. She unrolled her sleeping bag on the floor and climbed in fully clothed. Her body ached in places she had forgotten could ache. Her ankle throbbed. Her shoulders felt bruised where the pack straps had cut in for 2 days. She closed her eyes. At 2 in the morning she woke to the sound of a branch breaking under snow weight somewhere outside. The crack was sharp enough to penetrate sleep. She lay in darkness and listened to silence reassemble itself. She realized then what complete aloneness meant. No phone service, no radio, no emergency contact. The nearest human being was 14 miles away. If something happened, if she twisted her ankle badly enough to prevent walking, if she developed appendicitis or broke a bone or encountered a situation her wilderness first responder training had not covered, nobody would know and nobody would come, and she would have to solve the problem herself or fail to solve it and suffer whatever consequences failure generated. Fear spiked through her chest. The thought arrived unbidden. What if this was a mistake? She pushed the thought down, pushed it away, forced herself to breathe slowly, forced herself to remember that she had made it here, which meant she had the skills to make it here, which meant she could make it through whatever came next. She slept. Morning brought cold sunlight through dirty windows. Rebecca stood and stretched and felt every muscle protest. She pulled on her boots and walked outside. The spring was where Thomas's letter had said it would be, 200 feet north behind a boulder shaped like a turtle. The resemblance was unmistakable once you saw it. The boulder was the size of a small car, rounded on top, with a protrusion on one end that looked exactly like a turtle's head extended from its shell. Water emerged from the ground at the boulder's base, clear and cold. Rebecca knelt and cupped her hands and drank. The water tasted faintly of stone of minerals that had been dissolved and carried through underground channels for distances she could not measure. She filled her bottles. She found the woodshed behind the cabin half collapsed, but still containing firewood that Thomas had cut and stacked over 50 years ago, lodgepole pine, dry as bone. She tested a piece with the moisture meter she carried, 8% moisture content. Perfect. She found the outhouse. The seat had rotted through. The walls were intact. The pit had long since composted into dark, rich soil. She would need to rebuild it entirely. She found the lookout tower, structurally sound from what she could see. The cab at the top was dirty, but the windows were not broken. She did not climb it yet. That could wait. The cabinet stood in the corner where she had seen it the night before. She walked to it and tried the handle. Locked. Above the door, hanging from a nail, was a small metal ring with 3 keys. 2 skeleton keys for the door and the lock she had broken. The third was a small steel key, the kind that fits a filing cabinet. She took the ring down and walked back to the cabinet and tried the small key in the lock. It turned. Rebecca opened the cabinet doors slowly. Inside were maps, hundreds of them. Topographic maps, fire boundary maps, trail maps, hand-drawn route maps. They were folded and stacked on the cabinet shelves, organized by region, each one labeled in pencil on the cover with a date and a description. Some of them were rare. Rebecca could see immediately that some of them were the kind of maps that collectors paid serious money for. Original USGS surveys from the 1930s, hand-corrected fire response maps from the 1940s, route maps from before the modern trail system existed. But it was not the maps that made her stop breathing. On the bottom shelf of the cabinet, stacked neatly behind the map collection, were canvas bags, 3 of them, each one tied with twine, printed on the fabric, First Interstate Bank. She lifted one. It was heavy. She set it on the floor and untied the knot. Inside was money, old paper money, 20s and 50s, bound in stacks with paper bands the way banks used to band money. Each stack was labeled with a year. 1958, 1959, 1960. The bands were faded but intact. She opened the second bag. More money, more bands, more years. The third bag was the same. She counted everything sitting on the dusty pine floor of the ranger station, with late afternoon light coming through the western windows, and the fire long unlit in the stone fireplace. The bags held a total of $39,800 in old bills organized by year from 1958 to 1971. Rebecca's hands shook as she counted. She counted 3 times to be certain. The bills were genuine. Series 1950 through 1969. She had worked a bank teller job for 2 months in Seattle and knew what to check. Watermarks, security threads, paper texture, these were real. Her first thought, this is not mine. Her second thought, but whose is it? Her third thought, should I report this to police? Her fourth thought, what if they take it and I am homeless again? Her fifth thought, what would Mom tell me to do? She sat with those thoughts for a long time. At the back of the cabinet behind the bags was a leather portfolio. She opened it. Inside was a single typed letter on Forest Service letterhead, dated June 30th, 1971. To whoever finds this cabin, my name is Thomas James Hendricks, Forest Service employee, ID number SH-00447, Salmon River District Ranger, June 1958 to June 1971. 13 years, 2 months, 18 days of the best life I ever lived. I am leaving this money for whoever finds this place because I believe mountains choose people, not the other way around. If you are reading this, the mountains chose you. This money is taxable as found property. I kept records. They are in this portfolio. Report to IRS as treasure trove income. You will owe approximately 22% federal tax. Set aside $8,800. The remaining $31,000 is yours free and clear. I never married. I have no children. The cabin needs care. The roof is good for 20 years if you keep snow off it. The chimney needs repointing every 10 years. The lookout tower is structurally sound, but needs window repair in the cab. Never climb the tower in wind over 30 miles per hour. The spring water behind the turtle boulder is always clean. I love this place the way some people love other people, completely, without reservation. I could not love people this way. I tried once. I failed. Take care of it. The mountains will take care of you. Thomas J. Hendricks. Rebecca sat on the floor with the letter in her hands for an hour. Copper gold sunset light moved across the western windows. Dust motes drifted in the light. The cabin was silent except for the sound of wind in the pines outside. She thought, "This is crazy. I should report this to police." She thought Thomas said to keep it. The letter is like a will. She thought it is a letter from 1971, legally binding. She thought, do I deserve $31,000 when I did nothing to earn it? She thought, what would Mom say? She remembered her mother's last words, not "I love you," not "I am sorry," just "you know how to take care of yourself." Rebecca reached into the inside pocket of her backpack. The envelope had been there for 19 months. Sealed, addressed in her mother's handwriting, "When you find your place." She had never opened it, had never felt ready, had carried it like a talisman, like proof that her mother had believed she would eventually find something worth finding. She opened it now. The letter inside was short. Linda's handwriting, dated 2 days before she died. Rebecca, if you are reading this, you found it. The place you have been looking at on maps since you were 8 years old. I was afraid for you. The world punishes people who want what you want, but I was wrong to be afraid. You are the strongest person I know. Take the gift. You earned it by being brave enough to want it. I love you. Take care of yourself. Mom. Rebecca cried for the first time since the funeral. 19 months of not crying. The grief arrived all at once, as if it had been waiting for permission, as if opening this envelope in this cabin, 14 miles from the nearest road, was the permission it needed. She cried until she had no tears left. Then she walked outside and stood on the porch and looked at the mountains turning rose gold in alpenglow. She said out loud to no one and everyone, "I am going to take care of it." The decision was made. The mountains had chosen her. Her mother had trusted her. Thomas had trusted whoever the mountains sent. She walked back inside. She put Thomas's letter back in the leather portfolio. She put the money back in the canvas bags. She tied the bags carefully and placed them back on the bottom shelf of the cabinet. She closed the cabinet doors. Tomorrow she would start making this place livable. Tonight she would sleep in the cabin that was now hers, not because she had paid for it, not because she had earned it, but because the mountains had decided, and deciding was what mountains did, and arguing with mountains was like arguing with weather. The stars came out one by one above the clearing. Rebecca stood on the porch and watched them until cold drove her inside. She lit a candle from her supplies. She ate a cold dinner of cheese and dried fruit. She crawled into her sleeping bag on the floor. Before sleep came, she thought about the paths that had led her here. Her mother dying, her bankruptcy, her seasonal work, her 19 months of homelessness, her $10, her 14-mile walk with a twisted ankle, and a pack that weighed half her body weight. Every step had been necessary. Every loss had prepared her. Every closed door had pushed her toward the one door that remained open. The mountains keep their promises. She believed it now. She slept. The first week passed in a haze of physical labor that left her muscles screaming, and her hands blistered, and her sense of accomplishment deeper than anything she had felt in 19 months of surviving but not living. Rebecca worked from dawn until her body refused to work anymore, then slept the kind of sleep that comes from honest exhaustion rather than anxiety or displacement. The door lock required $45 in hardware from Stanley. She hiked out on day 3 snowshoes strapped to her pack because the forecast promised snow within 48 hours. The 14 miles took 7 hours with fresh legs and an empty pack. Carol saw her walk into the diner and had coffee poured before Rebecca reached the counter. "You made it. I made it." Carol pushed a plate across. "Eggs and toast, same as before, and you will make it back." Rebecca ate slowly, making the food last, making the warmth of the diner last. "Yes, hardware store is 2 blocks north. Tell Bill I sent you. He will give you the right lock." Bill gave her the right lock and asked no questions when she paid cash and asked no questions when she said she lived up at the old Hendricks place. Small towns operated on information networks that required no official channels. Everyone knew within hours when someone new arrived, when someone left, when something changed. She cached supplies at the trailhead on the way back. 20 pounds of flour in a bare canister behind the same boulder where she had hidden the first cache. GPS coordinates recorded. She would retrieve it in 2 weeks. The cabin transformation happened in stages, each one revealing what the previous ranger had built and what 52 years of abandonment had undone. The chinking required oakum and mortar and wood ash mixed into a paste that filled gaps between logs. The materials came from the property itself. Old rope unraveled into oakum. Creek lime provided the base for mortar. Ash from the fireplace once she got a fire going. $0 spent. She worked section by section, stuffing gaps, smoothing mortar, moving methodically around the perimeter. The cook stove and fireplace required 3 days of cleaning. Creosote had accumulated in layers black and tarry and difficult to remove. She scraped it out with a wire brush and a putty knife, working in the cold because she could not light a fire until the flue was clear, and the flue would not be clear until she removed 50 pounds of creosote that had been building since 1971. When she finally lit the first fire, smoke drew cleanly up the chimney. Heat filled the room. The wood was Thomas's woodcut and split and stacked over 50 years ago, and it burned as if it had been waiting all this time for someone to need it. The solar panel arrived at Stanley Post Office in 3 boxes. Rebecca had ordered it online using the library computer in Coeur d'Alene before she left. 120 watts, 12-volt battery, charge controller, $340 total. She carried it in across 2 trips, her pack loaded so heavily that she had to stop every quarter mile to rest. Installation took a full day. She mounted the panel on the south-facing roof using bolts drilled into rafters. She ran wire through a small hole. She drilled in the wall. sealed the hole with caulk connected the charge controller, connected the battery. When the system came online, the small LED on the controller glowed green. Electricity. Not enough to run a refrigerator or a heater or any of the conveniences that defined modern living, but enough to charge her headlamp batteries, enough to power a small reading light, enough to feel like the 21st century had reached this clearing in some small way. She kept a ledger. The notebook she had used for GPS coordinates became a financial record. Every dollar tracked, every expense justified. Property purchase, $10. Back taxes, $5,100. Supplies initial, $186. Hardware, $45. Solar, $340. Total spent, $5,681. Available from Thomas after setting aside $8,800 for taxes, $31,000. Debt to Stephanie, $500. Rebecca's rule, written at the top of the first page. Use Thomas's money minimally. Earn own income when possible. It is not mine until I earn it. The maps revealed their value slowly, the way secrets reveal themselves when you are not looking for them, but stumble across them anyway. Rebecca had been inventorying the cabinet contents, unfolding each map, carefully checking condition, refolding along original creases. The collection totaled 347 maps. Most were standard Forest Service administrative maps, useful for historical purposes, but not particularly rare. 12 were original USGS topographic surveys from 1933 to 1947. 8 were hand-corrected fire boundary maps from the 1940s with annotations in what she recognized as Thomas's handwriting, neat block letters that marked access routes and water sources, and areas where fire had jumped containment lines. One complete set documented the Salmon River primitive area before it became the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness, before the boundaries expanded and the name changed and the maps became obsolete. Rebecca photographed 6 of the rarest maps using her phone during a supply run to Stanley, where cell service existed. She uploaded the photos to her email. She researched rare map dealers using the library computer. She found Wright Cartographic Archives in Boise, third-generation operation, specializing in Western historical documents. The email she sent was brief. I have maps that may interest you. Attached photos. Let me know if you want to see originals. Kenneth Wright called the library within 2 hours. The librarian found Rebecca in the stacks and handed her the phone with a look that said she was not supposed to receive personal calls, but exceptions could be made. Where did you get these? Rebecca's chest tightened. I bought a property. They were inside. Kenneth's voice carried the controlled excitement of someone who dealt in rare objects and had learned not to show enthusiasm too early. These are not just old maps. These are historical documents. The primitive area set alone could be worth $40,000 if it is complete and in good condition. It is complete. I need to see them in person. I need to authenticate. The cabin is 14 miles from the nearest road. Then I will hike 14 miles. Kenneth Wright drove from Boise to Stanley 6 hours and met Rebecca at the trailhead on a cold morning in late November when the first serious snow had fallen and the trail required snowshoes. He was 55 years old, lean in the way people who spend time outdoors become lean, carrying a pack that suggested he had done this before. They hiked in together. Kenneth asked questions. Rebecca gave answers that revealed nothing about why she was living in a ranger station at age 21, or where she had come from, or what had brought her here. Kenneth stopped asking after the first hour. Some people told their stories. Some people did not. The maps were what mattered. At the cabin, Kenneth spent 3 hours examining the collection. He used a jeweler's loupe to check paper quality. He used a UV light to check for alterations. He cross-referenced dates and survey numbers against databases he had loaded on a tablet that he charged from Rebecca's solar battery with apologetic courtesy. The authentication concluded with numbers that made Rebecca's hands shake despite her attempt to remain calm. Total collection value $127,000. The primitive area set $40,000. The fire maps with Thomas's annotations $12,000 each. The original USGS surveys $3,000 to $8,000, depending on condition and rarity. Kenneth made an offer, $95,000 cash for everything. I can write you a check today. Rebecca surprised herself with the answer that came out. No. Kenneth blinked. No, I will sell 6 maps. You choose which ones, fair market value. Kenneth studied her. Why only 6? Because Thomas collected these for 13 years. They belong with this cabin. They are part of what makes this place what it is. I am not selling the history. Kenneth respected this. She could see it in the way he nodded, in the way he pulled out a different calculator and started running different numbers. 6 maps at fair market value would be $18,000. I will need to take them with me today. I will provide full documentation, IRS, Form 1099, everything legal. Rebecca agreed. Kenneth selected the maps, 2 of the USGS surveys that had duplicates in the collection, 3 fire maps that were valuable but not unique, 1 administrative map that documented a district boundary change that map collectors apparently cared about. He wrote a check for $18,000. Rebecca folded it and put it in her notebook. Kenneth packed the maps in protective sleeves and carried them out with the care of someone transporting fragile cargo. Before he left, he handed her his card. If you ever decide to sell more, call me first. And if you ever need authentication services for anything else, I do not charge friends. They were not friends. They had known each other for 8 hours. But this was how transactions became relationships in the West. You did business honestly. You respected what people valued. You became friends whether you intended to or not. The check cleared in 3 business days. Rebecca walked to the bank in Stanley and deposited it. She walked to the post office and sent Stephanie a money order for $700, $500 principal, $200 thank you gift because Stephanie had trusted her when trust was the only currency Rebecca could not repay directly. She paid the $5,100 in back property taxes at the county courthouse. The clerk stamped paid across the delinquency notice and filed the paperwork that made Rebecca the legal owner of 0.8 acres and 1 structure and all improvements thereon. Her net worth, after these transactions, $12,200 liquid, $31,000 in Thomas's fund that she still had not touched. Remaining map collection worth approximately $109,000, but those maps would stay in the cabinet where they belonged. December arrived with snow that fell for 3 days straight and accumulated to 18 inches in the clearing. Rebecca settled into routines that fit the cabin the way water fits the shape of the container holding it. She woke at 6 when pre-dawn light began filtering through eastern windows. She started a fire in the cook stove using kindling she had split the night before. She made coffee, instant crystals dissolved in boiled water, no milk, no sugar, just caffeine and heat. Breakfast was oatmeal with dried fruit. She ate standing by the cook stove while water heated for washing. She washed in a basin using creek water she had carried in the previous evening, heating it to just below boiling, letting it cool to just above comfortable. Washing in winter was an exercise in efficiency. Minimal water, minimal heat loss, minimal time spent exposed. The mornings belonged to projects. She split firewood using a maul and wedge, working through the standing dead lodgepoles at the clearing's edge, converting them to rounds, splitting the rounds into pieces that would fit the firebox. The work was mechanical and meditative. Lift the maul, aim, swing. The wood split or it did not. If it did not, she repositioned and swung again. No shortcuts, no tricks, just leverage and repetition and the understanding that cordwood accumulated one piece at a time. She repaired the porch boards using lumber she split from a fallen lodgepole she found half a mile down the trail. The work required a wedge and patience. The resulting planks were rougher than store-bought lumber, but they matched the cabin's aesthetic in a way that dimensional lumber from a hardware store would not have. She fitted them into place and secured them with hand-forged nails she found in a coffee can in the woodshed. Midday brought snowshoe patrols. She walked the trails within a 3-mile radius, clearing fallen branches, marking hazards, checking for signs of winter kill or avalanche paths or anything that might matter to someone else who came through here. The Forest Service did not pay her to do this. The Forest Service did not know she was doing this. But trails required maintenance, and Rebecca was here, and the work needed doing. She saw wildlife. Elk moving through deep snow, their tracks revealing travel routes between feeding areas. A pine marten hunting along a creek bank, its body a dark streak against white snow. Once a lynx sitting motionless on a fallen log, watching her with the kind of attention predators give to anything that moves, but does not immediately classify as prey or threat. Afternoons she spent reading or studying maps or writing in her journal. The journal had evolved from technical notes into something else, something that recorded not just what she did, but what she observed, what she thought, what the land revealed when she paid attention. The way lodgepole pine bark smelled when morning sun hit it and released resin into cold air. The way raven calls carried differently depending on temperature and humidity. The way snow fell in this valley always from the northwest, always starting as small flakes that grew larger as the storm intensified. Evenings meant cooking on the wood cook stove. Simple meals, rice and beans, pasta with olive oil and salt, soup made from dried vegetables and bouillon cubes. She ate slowly, making meals last, using eating as a punctuation mark between the day's work and the night's rest. She slept hard, 8 o'clock to 6, 10 hours that her body required after days spent working in cold and altitude. The sleep was dreamless most nights, or if there were dreams, she did not remember them, which amounted to the same thing. The monthly supply runs became ritual. She left at dawn on a predetermined day, first of each month, and hiked the 14 miles to Stanley. The trail was familiar now. She knew where the creek crossings iced over and required caution. She knew where the slope faced south and snow melted first. She knew where to cache gear for the return trip to reduce pack weight. Carol at the diner started saving newspapers. You need to know what is happening in the world even if you do not live in it. Rebecca read the papers while eating the meal Carol served, without asking. Cheeseburger and fries and a chocolate milkshake. The same every time. The meal became a marker, a way of measuring time passing. November cheeseburger, December cheeseburger, January cheeseburger. The world in the newspapers kept happening. Elections and disasters and technological developments that meant nothing to someone whose primary concern was keeping firewood dry and water unfrozen. Ronald Clark approached her in February during a supply run. He was 77 years old, moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints no longer bent the way they used to, but who was not ready to stop moving yet. He wore a Forest Service cap from a different era, back when the Shield logo was embroidered instead of printed. Heard someone is living in Hendrix's old station, that you Rebecca's defenses went up automatically. Yes, Ronald held up a hand. Not here to cause trouble. Worked with Thomas in the 60s. District office in Salmon. Wanted to meet whoever was taking care of his place. They talked for an hour at a table in the back of the diner while Carol refilled coffee and pretended not to listen. Ronald had stories. Thomas came to the Ranger Service in 1958 after something happened that he never talked about. Ronald had heard it was a woman who died of fiancé in a car accident in 1957, but Thomas never confirmed it, and asking direct questions about pain was not something men of that generation did with each other. Best backcountry ranger I saw in 30 years. Ronald's coffee had gone cold, but he drank it anyway. Could track elk forecast weather 3 days out, navigate by stars. But he could not talk to people worth a damn. That is why he took the most remote station we had. He turned down 7 promotions. Every time they offered him more money and an office job, he said no. Why? Ronald looked at her like the answer was obvious. Because offices have fluorescent lights and meetings and paperwork. Thomas needed mountains the way most people need oxygen. Taking him out of the backcountry would have killed him slower than the heart attack that killed him in Alaska. Rebecca filed this information away, with everything else she was learning about the man whose money sat in canvas bags in a metal cabinet. Thomas was becoming real to her in pieces. The careful handwriting on maps, the precisely cut firewood, the letter that trusted mountains to choose. Now Ronald's stories adding texture and detail, and the understanding that Thomas had not been running toward wilderness so much as running from something else. The search and rescue training happened because Rebecca volunteered and because Custer County SAR needed volunteers, and because having official credentials with the Forest Service seemed like good insurance against future complications. The training ran weekends in Stanley from January through March. Wilderness first aid refresher, winter survival skills, avalanche awareness, map and compass navigation, radio protocol. Rebecca already knew most of it, but she sat through the classes and took the certification tests and received the credentials that made her an official volunteer responder. The team leader, a woman named Jennifer, who worked as a paramedic in Boise and volunteered her weekends to mountain rescue, made a note on Rebecca's file, resident of Hendrix Station. Available for response when in town. Backcountry response capability limited by distance from trailhead. The note became part of Rebecca's official record with the Forest Service. It established her as a responsible wilderness resident. It created a paper trail. It would matter later. March brought the first test of skills she hoped she would never need to use. Rebecca was hiking back from a supply run when she saw tracks on the trail. Fresh, made within the last hour, Boot prints, adult-size gait pattern that looked wrong. The stride was too short. The depth varied inconsistently. Either the person was injured or exhausted, or both. She followed the tracks. 2 miles from the cabin, she found him. Jake Morrison, 29-years-old software engineer from Portland, had attempted a solo crossing from the western trailhead during a late spring storm. He had miscalculated the distance and the weather, and the rate at which hypothermia develops when you are wet and cold, and your core temperature drops below the point where your body can generate enough heat to compensate. Rebecca found him sitting against a tree, confused. His speech slurred, his movements uncoordinated. Classic signs: moderate hypothermia, core temperature probably 94 degrees, maybe lower. Her training took over. Get him dry, get him warm, get him to shelter. She stripped his wet jacket and shirt. She pulled her spare fleece from her pack and put it on him. She got him standing, got him moving, got him walking toward the cabin, because walking generated heat, and sitting generated nothing but further cooling. Can you tell me your name, Jake? I think. Yes, Jake. Good. Keep walking, Jake. Cabin is close. At the cabin, she got him into her sleeping bag with hot water bottles against his core. She fed him warm liquids, hot cocoa from her supplies dissolved in boiling water, sugar and fat, and heat. She kept him awake by asking questions that required thinking. Where are you from? What is your job? What is your mother's name? Questions that forced his brain to work, to stay engaged, to fight the seductive pull of hypothermia that made you want to sleep, and sleeping meant dying. His core temperature stabilized after 2 hours. His speech cleared. His confusion faded. He looked around the cabin as if seeing it for the first time. Where am I, Ranger Station? 14 miles from the trailhead. You were hypothermic. You are stable now, but you need to stay warm tonight. She gave him her sleeping bag and her pad and slept that night on the floor in her jacket. In the morning, she helped him hike out. The 14 miles took 8 hours because Jake was weak and his legs kept cramping, and Rebecca had to support his weight on steep sections. At the trailhead, she used the emergency radio that the Forest Service maintained in a weatherproof box. SAR dispatch answered. She reported the situation. They logged it. Jake gave them his information. They would follow up to make sure he reached a hospital for evaluation. Before Jake left, he looked at Rebecca with the kind of gratitude that makes people uncomfortable because it is too raw, too honest. You saved my life. You were lucky I found you. No, you knew what to do. Most people would have panicked. Rebecca had nothing to say to that. She hiked back to the cabin and wrote the incident in her journal with clinical detachment. Date, time of patient presentation, treatment provided, outcome, the facts without the emotion. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at the Stanley Post Office, addressed to Rebecca Torres, General Delivery. Inside was a Pulaski axe, custom engraved with an inscription on the handle: "For the Ranger who saved my life, JM 2024. Carol held it up when Rebecca came in for supplies. Someone thinks you are special. Rebecca took the axe. It was beautiful, properly balanced, sharp enough to shave with. She would use it. Tools existed to be used, not displayed. Jake Morrison wrote a letter to the Forest Service commending Rebecca's actions. The letter went into her file. It sat next to the SAR volunteer credentials. It established a pattern. Rebecca Torres was not just living in the back country. She was contributing. She was providing public benefit. She was the kind of person who made the wilderness safer for other people. The letter would matter when the Forest Service came after her. April brought the woman who claimed to be Thomas's daughter. Rebecca was at the Sawtooth Diner supply run eating the cheeseburger Carol had ready. Before Rebecca reached the counter, the door opened. A woman walked in. 60-something, professional clothes that looked out of place in Stanley. Business casual in a town where casual meant fleece and hiking boots. The woman approached Carol. Her voice was steady, controlled the voice of someone who had practiced what she was going to say. "I am looking for Rebecca Torres. I heard she is living in my father's old ranger station." Rebecca's pulse spiked. She set down her burger. Carol glanced at Rebecca, then back at the woman. "Who is your father?" "Thomas Hendricks." The diner went quiet. Carol's expression shifted from neutral to interested. "Thomas Hendricks died in 1989. "I know. I am his daughter. My name is Rachel." Rebecca stood. The movement drew Rachel's attention. "You must be Rebecca." They sat at a corner table, away from other patrons. Carol brought coffee without asking and disappeared into the kitchen to give them privacy while absolutely listening to every word through the service window. Rachel pulled out documentation, birth certificate, Thomas James Hendricks listed as father, Linda Reynolds listed as mother, date of birth March 3, 1960, Rachel Elizabeth Reynolds, child support records, 18 years of canceled checks, $200 per month from March 1960 through March 1978. Never late, never missed. Death certificate from Alaska 1989. Thomas James Hendricks. Next of kin, Rachel Elizabeth Reynolds. "I am his legal heir." Rachel's hands were steady as she spread the documents across the table. "He left money in that cabin. It belongs to me." Rebecca's throat tightened. "He said in his letter that he had no children." He said that Rebecca pulled out her phone, showed Rachel the photo she had taken of Thomas's letter. Rachel read it. Her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes shifted, hardened. "Of course he said that." Rachel's laugh was bitter. "He pretended I did not exist for 63 years. Why would death change anything?" The story came out in pieces. Thomas and Linda in 1959, summer relationship at the remote station. Linda got pregnant. Thomas proposed by letter. Linda said no because Thomas had made it clear he would never leave the mountains, and Linda wanted a life near family, near civilization, near the infrastructure that makes raising children possible without heroic effort. Linda raised Rachel alone in Portland. Thomas sent money, $200 every month, like clockwork. But he never visited, never called, never met Rachel until she forced the meeting. I was 25. Rachel's coffee sat untouched. Ph.D., student in biology. I drove to Stanley and found him at this diner. Sat at that table over there. Asked him why he never came to see me. What did he say? He said he could not be what I needed. That was it. Not an apology, not an explanation, just, "I cannot be what you need." Rebecca absorbed this. "Did you see him again?" "No. He died 4 years later in Alaska. Working a fire lookout tower, heart attack at 59. They shipped his body to Portland because I was listed as next of kin. I paid for his funeral. 30 people attended. 29 were Forest Service employees who felt obligated. One was me. I am sorry." Rachel's eyes focused on Rebecca with the kind of intensity that comes from years of thinking about a single question. "Do not be sorry. Tell me this. Do you think you have more right to his money than I do?" Rebecca's answer surprised her by arriving fully formed. "I do not know. He left it for whoever found the cabin. I found the cabin, but you are his daughter. The law probably says it is yours. Probably is not definitely. No, it is not. Rachel leaned back. She looked tired. Not physically tired. Tired in the way people get when they have been carrying something heavy for too long and are ready to set it down, whether or not setting it down solves anything. I make $140,000 a year. I do not need his money, but it is the principle. He sent me $200 a month for 18 years. That is $43,200 total. He saved $40,000 for a stranger. Do the math. He valued a stranger's future more than his daughter's. I need you to explain that to me. Rebecca had no explanation. She had nothing to offer except honesty. I cannot explain it. I can only tell you what his letter said, that he loved this place the way most people love other people, that he tried to love people and failed, that he trusted the mountains to send someone, and the mountains sent you, apparently. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, softer, less confrontational, more curious. Will you show me the cabin? Rebecca did not expect this. You want to see it? I want to understand what he chose instead of me. They hiked in together the next day. Rachel was in good shape for 63. She kept pace without complaint. She asked no questions during the hike. She just walked and looked and breathed the thin mountain air. At the cabin, Rachel stood in the clearing the same way Rebecca had stood 6 months earlier, taking it in, processing, trying to reconcile the place with the person with the choices that had led to consequences still rippling forward through decades. Inside, Rachel walked through the single room slowly. She ran her hand along the stone fireplace. She looked at the cook stove. She opened the cabinet and saw the maps that remained. She saw the leather portfolio with Thomas's letter. She did not ask to see the money. They sat on the porch as sunset turned the western ridge copper and gold. The aspens in the meadow had leafed out their new leaves, the brilliant pale green that aspens get in spring. Can I tell you what I have learned in my research? Rachel's voice was quiet. What research? I am a plant ecologist, semi-retired, but I still work. I have been studying alpine plant communities for 40 years. Rebecca waited. The plants around this cabin are 40% more diverse than similar elevations in the surrounding wilderness. Rachel gestured at the meadow. Do you know why? No. Because my father protected them. For 13 years, he prevented overgrazing by elk through selective culling. He prevented erosion through trail maintenance. He prevented human trampling by discouraging casual visitors. This meadow is a time capsule. It shows what alpine ecosystems looked like before heavy recreation pressure. Rachel turned to look at Rebecca. His actual legacy is not the money. It is this. He preserved something rare. He just could not preserve his relationship with me. Both things can be true. Rebecca understood what Rachel was offering. Not forgiveness exactly, but something close. Acceptance, maybe. The recognition that people are complicated and love is complicated, and the things we choose to protect reveal what we value, even if what we value hurts the people who deserved our protection more. Keep the money. Rachel's words were firm, final. I do not want it, but I want something in return. What I want to establish a research station here. Summer only. I will bring graduate students. We will document the ecology, create baseline climate data, publish papers. Rachel continued before Rebecca could respond. In exchange, I will help fund your trail maintenance, and I will work with the Forest Service to get this area designated as a research natural area, protected status. No development, ever. Why would you do that? Because my father loved this place more than he loved people. I cannot change that. I am done being angry about it. But I can make sure what he loved matters, that it contributes to science, that his 13 years meant something beyond his own solitude. Rebecca's chest felt tight. What about the money? You are legally entitled to it. I do not want it. Use it however Thomas intended. Give it to someone who needs mountains the way you both needed them. They sat in silence as the sun dropped behind the ridge and the valley filled with shadow, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Rebecca thought about how this conversation could have gone differently. Rachel could have sued, could have forced the issue, could have taken everything. Instead, she was offering partnership, offering protection, offering a way forward that honored Thomas's intentions while acknowledging his failures. I would like to visit once a year. Rachel stood, not to check on you, to check on this place, to understand what he understood. Is that acceptable? Rebecca stood as well. Yes, they shook hands on the porch of a cabin that belonged to both of them in different ways, both of them inheriting pieces of a man who had been too broken to give them what they deserved, but had given them what he could, and what he could turned out to be enough if you changed your definition of enough. Rachel hiked out the next morning. Rebecca stood on the porch and watched her disappear down the trail and felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been clenched for a long time, loosening slightly. Not completely, but enough to breathe deeper than she had breathed in months. The certified letter arrived at the Stanley post office in June. Carol held it up when Rebecca walked in. This looks official. It was official. United States Forest Service, Salmon Chalice, National Forest District Ranger's Office. Notice of Special Use Permit Violation. Rebecca's hands shook as she read it. The legal language was dense, but the message was clear. Her 0.8-acre parcel was an in-holding surrounded by federal land. Legal access required crossing 13.2 miles of national forest land via trail and road. The previous owner had held a special use permit for access. That permit had expired in 1973. Rebecca had been using federal land without a valid permit for 18 months. Violation unauthorized use of federal land. Penalty $150 per day. Retroactive fine. Rebecca did the math. 18 months, 540 days, times 150, $81,000. The letter continued. To maintain legal access, she must apply for a new special use permit. Annual fee $800. Property must demonstrate public benefit compatible with National Forest Management goals. Personal residence alone was not sufficient. She must prove education, research, historical preservation, or recreation access. If she could not prove public benefit, the permit would be denied. If the permit was denied, she would have no legal access to her property. The property would become landlocked, functionally worthless. Rebecca sat in the diner booth and read the letter 3 times. The words did not change. The numbers did not change. The situation did not change. $81,000. She had $12,000 in the bank. Even with Thomas's $31,000, she did not have enough, and paying the fine would leave her with nothing. Back where she started, except worse, because she would own a cabin she could not legally reach. Carol brought coffee trouble. Rebecca showed her the letter. Carol read it slowly. When she finished, she set it down and looked at Rebecca with an expression that combined sympathy with something harder. "Welcome to public lands law. The government gives with one hand and takes with the other. What do I do?" "You call a lawyer." Carol walked to the phone behind the counter and came back with a business card. "Gary Young, practices in Salmon, specializes in this exact type of problem. Ronald Clark gave me this card 6 months ago and said to give it to you when you needed it. Guess that time is now. How did Ronald know I would need it? Because everyone who owns an in-holding eventually needs it." Gary Young met Rebecca at the diner 2 days later. He was 52 years old, dressed like someone who spent more time in the backcountry than in courtrooms carrying a briefcase that looked like it had been through weather. He ordered coffee and got straight to business. "The Forest Service is technically correct. You violated permit requirements, but they have a problem." "What problem?" "You have been maintaining their trail for 18 months, cleared 47 fallen trees, repaired 12 drainage issues, fixed 3 bridges. That is work they should have done. You did it for free. How do you know what I did? Because I asked them. Public records. They track all trail reports. Your name is on half of them through your SAR volunteer credentials." Gary pulled out a calculator. "At federal contract labor rates, your work is worth $35 an hour. 89 hours documented. That is $3,115 in labor, plus materials you provided. Call it $3,350 total. That does not cover $81,000. No, but it gives us leverage. Plus your SAR volunteer work. Plus the Jake Morrison save, which generated positive press. Plus the fact that Rachel Hendricks wants to establish a research station, which is exactly the kind of public benefit the Forest Service requires." Gary set down his calculator. "Here is what we do. We apply for the permit as a historical preservation site with public benefit. We document your volunteer work. We get Rachel to submit her research proposal. We negotiate the fine down based on services rendered. What if they say no? Then you lose the cabin and I do not get paid. How much do you charge?" "Normal rate is $300 an hour. For you, I will do it for $1,200 total if we win nothing, if we lose." "Why?" "Because I am tired of the Forest Service squeezing out people who actually take care of the land while letting timber companies and mining operations do whatever they want. You are doing this right. I want to help people who do it right." Rebecca agreed because she had no choice, and because Gary's anger at bureaucratic injustice felt genuine, and because sometimes you had to trust people you just met because the alternative was fighting alone and losing. The negotiation took 3 weeks. Gary submitted documentation, Rebecca's trail work reports, her SAR credentials, Jake Morrison's commendation letter, Rachel's research proposal from Oregon State University, historical designation application for the cabin as an intact 1927 ranger station. The Forest Service countered with a fine reduction to $45,000. Gary countered with $10,000. They settled at $2,800, plus $800 annual permit fee, plus mandatory annual trail maintenance reports. Rebecca paid the fine from her savings, paid Gary's fee, paid the permit fee. Her bank account dropped to $6,860. She sat in the cabin and ran numbers in her ledger. She could not survive on savings. She needed income, sustainable income, real income that would last. The solution came in pieces assembled from conversations and research, and the understanding that the cabin's location was both its liability and its asset. Wilderness Guide Service. Small groups. Maximum 4 people. 3-day trips using the cabin as base camp. $800 per person. 6 trips per summer. $19,200 gross. Minus permits and insurance and food costs. $5,400. Net $13,800. Blog and online content. She started writing about off-grid living, wilderness skills, conservation. Posted monthly. Built to 5,000 followers in 6 months. Monetized through affiliate links to outdoor gear she actually used. Occasional sponsored posts from companies that made products that did not suck. Income $400 to $600 monthly. Map reproduction sales. Kenneth Wright's idea. Scan the historical maps. Sell high-quality prints and digital downloads. $45 for prints, $15 for digital. Income $200 to $400 monthly. Total projected annual income $21,000. Total projected annual expenses $4,500. Net $16,500 annually. Sustainable, legal, based on skills she had and infrastructure she had built. Rebecca wrote the plan in her ledger. She felt something she had not felt since her mother died. Not happiness exactly, but its cousin. The sense that the future contained possibilities instead of just obstacles. That she had built something that could last. That the mountains had kept their promise, and she was keeping hers. Thomas's $31,000 remained untouched in the metal cabinet. Emergency fund, insurance against disaster. Proof that the gift had been real even if she was determined to earn her way without using it. Summer arrived with wildflowers in the meadow, and graduate students from Oregon State, and tourists who paid $800 to spend 3 days learning wilderness skills from someone who lived them. Rebecca guided them through the mountains, taught them to read topographic maps, taught them to filter water and build fires, and recognize the signs that weather was changing. At night, around the campfire, they asked questions. How did you end up here? Why do you live alone? Are you happy? Rebecca gave them honest answers stripped of sentiment. I ended up here because I had nowhere else to go. I live alone because alone is the only way I know how to live. Happy is the wrong question. The right question is, am I where I am supposed to be? And the answer is yes. The mountains keep their promises. They promised her a place where being exactly who she was would be enough. They delivered. Now she was delivering on her end, taking care of the land, maintaining the trails, teaching people who needed teaching, making Thomas's cabin into something more than his refuge, making it into a legacy that served purposes he never imagined. She wrote in her journal on the anniversary of her first night in the cabin. 1 year ago, I had $10 and no plan and no idea if this would work. Today, I have a business and a research station and a future. The mountains chose me. I am choosing them back. August arrived in the second year with heat that made the high country shimmer and brought Rachel back with research equipment and 5 graduate students who set up tents in the meadow and talked about climate change and phenology and things Rebecca understood peripherally but did not need to understand completely to recognize as important. Rebecca spent the morning before Rachel's arrival cleaning the lookout tower cab. The structure had stood unused since Thomas left it in 1971. 53 years of weather and neglect. The ladder rungs felt solid under her weight as she climbed. The cab at the top was 12 feet square, with windows on all sides and a floor made of tongue and groove planks that had warped slightly over decades but remained sound. She swept out bird nests. She wiped down windows with vinegar and newspaper. She tested the floor for soft spots and found none. The structure was solid. Thomas had built things to last. A floorboard near the northwest corner felt loose under her boot. She knelt and examined it. The board had shifted, creating a gap. When she lifted it, she found a space underneath, a hiding place, and inside that space, a second leather portfolio. Rebecca's pulse quickened as she pulled it out. The leather was more fragile than the first portfolio, cracked along the edges, spotted with mildew. She opened it carefully. Inside was Thomas's personal journal. 13 years of daily entries in the same precise handwriting she recognized from the maps. 1958 to 1971, every day documented. Along with the journal were letters, unsent, addressed to Rachel, but never mailed, and photographs, Linda Reynolds holding a baby, school photos of Rachel at various ages that Linda must have sent over the years. Rebecca sat in the lookout cab and began reading. The journal opened on June 15, 1958. First day at the station, the entries started factual, weather observations, wildlife sightings, trail conditions, but by the third week, the entries shifted. Personal observations crept in, thoughts about solitude, reflections on why he had chosen this posting. She flipped forward to August 1959. Linda Reynolds arrived today from Portland, here for the summer doing botanical surveys for her graduate research. She is brilliant and funny and completely wrong for this place. She loves the plants but hates the isolation. We are opposites in every way that matters. I should stay away from her. I will not stay away from her. September 1959. Linda is leaving next week. I asked her to stay. She laughed and said staying would kill her. She needs people and conversation and the infrastructure of civilization. I need the opposite. We both know this cannot work. Rebecca's hands tightened on the journal. She flipped ahead. August 15th, 1959. Linda told me today she is pregnant. I asked her to marry me. She said no. She said I would make a terrible husband because I love this place more than I could love anyone. She is right. I wish she was not right, but she is. I will send money. I will do my legal duty, but I will not pretend I can be the kind of father a child deserves when I know I cannot leave these mountains. March 3rd, 1960. Daughter born, Rachel Elizabeth. Linda sent a photo, 7 pounds 4 ounces. I cried for an hour. Then I walked into the forest and screamed until my voice gave out. I am a coward. I choose mountains over my own child because mountains are easier than people. Mountains do not expect you to change. Linda is right to keep Rachel from me. The entries continued, year after year. Thomas documenting Rachel's childhood through the photographs Linda sent. First birthday, first day of school, middle school graduation, always accompanied by his own self-recrimination. Always ending with the same conclusion, Rachel was better off without him. December 20th, 1960. Linda sent photo of Rachel in Christmas dress. She looks happy. I sent $400 instead of the usual $200 to buy her something nice. Linda sent it back with a note. She does not need your guilt money. She needs consistency. Linda is right. I went back to $200 monthly. every month, never late, never missed. It is the only thing I can give her that matters: reliability. Rebecca turned pages until she found the entry she was looking for. June 12, 1985. Rachel came to Stanley today. She is 25, Ph.D. in biology. Linda raised her well. She asked me why I never visited. I told her the truth. I could not be what she needed. She asked why I had her then. I had no answer. What could I say? You were an accident, and I am too broken to fix it. That is the truth, but saying it would only hurt her more. She left crying. I wanted to follow her. I did not. I am a coward still. The final entry stopped Rebecca cold. May 30th, 1971. 1 month before Thomas wrote the letter he left in the metal cabinet. I am leaving for Alaska next month. The service is closing this station. They want me to take a desk job in Salmon. I would rather die. I have saved $39,800 over 13 years. I thought about giving it to Rachel. She is 27 now, has a Ph.D. in biology. Brilliant. Her mother tells me this in the annual Christmas cards I do not deserve. But if I give Sarah the money, it is guilt money. It is me trying to buy forgiveness I have not earned. She does not need my money. She needs a father. I cannot be that. I will not insult her by pretending $40,000 makes up for 27 years of absence. So I am leaving the money here for someone who understands what this place means. Someone who will find it because they came looking for what I came looking for, a place where you can be completely alone and completely yourself. Rachel will be fine without me. She has always been fine without me. But whoever finds this cabin might not be fine, might be lost, might need exactly what I needed when I was 27 and found this place after Margaret died. I am trusting the mountains to send someone. The mountains have never failed me. People have failed me. I have failed people. But mountains keep their promises. Rebecca sat in the lookout tower cab for 4 hours, reading every entry. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows lengthened in the valley. When she finally closed the journal, her hands were shaking. Thomas had lied in his letter. He did have a child. He knew he had a child. He had chosen deliberately and consciously to ignore her existence. But he had also loved Rachel in the only way he knew how, by sending money reliably, by staying away so he could not hurt her more than his absence already hurt her, by documenting her life in a journal he never expected anyone to read. The question sitting in Rebecca's chest like a stone: should she tell Rachel? The journal would prove Thomas lied. It would prove he chose abandonment knowingly. But it would also show that the choice caused him pain, that he understood what he was doing and did it anyway because he believed staying away was the lesser harm, which was worse. The lie that protected Rachel from knowing how deliberate her father's absence was, or the truth that proved he thought about her constantly while still choosing not to be in her life. If you found proof that someone's parent deliberately abandoned them, would you tell them? Or would you burn the evidence and let them keep believing their parent just could not help it? Rebecca stood in the lookout tower and looked out at 80 miles of wilderness in every direction. The mountains did not answer. They never answered. They just stood there, being mountains, and left the deciding to people. Rachel arrived the next afternoon with her research team. They set up base camp efficiently practiced movements that showed they had done this before. While the students organized equipment, Rachel walked to the cabin. Rebecca met her on the porch. "I found something." Rachel's expression shifted immediately. "Something good or something bad, I do not know yet." They sat at the wooden table inside the cabin. Rebecca placed the journal between them. This was in the lookout tower, hidden under a floorboard. Thomas's personal journal. 13 years. "It mentions you." Rachel's face went still. "Mentions me, how he knew you existed. He thought about you constantly. He documented your entire childhood through photos your mother sent him, but he still chose to stay away." Rebecca pushed the journal across the table. "I am sorry. I should not have shown you. I should have burned it." Rachel did not touch the journal immediately. When she finally picked it up, her hands were steady. She read for an hour without speaking. Rebecca sat across from her and watched emotions move across Rachel's face like weather. Anger, sadness, something that might have been relief. When Rachel finished, she closed the journal carefully. She did not cry. She laughed instead, a sound with edges sharp enough to cut. Of course he knew. Of course it was a choice. "I spent 63 years thinking he was just broken, incapable. That was easier than knowing he was capable, and chose not to. I should not have shown you. No." Rachel's voice was firm. "You should have. I needed to know the truth, even if it is worse than what I imagined." The silence that followed felt different than the silence before. Heavier, more complete. Rachel stood and walked to the window. She looked out at the meadow where her students were setting up research plots. He was right about one thing. I did not need his money. I needed honesty. He could not give it when he was alive, but he gave it to you in this journal, and you gave it to me. That is worth more than $40,000. She turned back to Rebecca. "Can I tell you what I have learned in my research here?" Rebecca nodded. "The alpine plant communities within 2 miles of this cabin are 40% more diverse than comparable elevations in the surrounding wilderness." Rachel's voice took on the cadence of a lecturer, controlled and precise. "Do you know why you mentioned it before? He protected them. Yes, but I have been documenting it systematically now. For 13 years, my father prevented overgrazing through selective elk culling. He prevented erosion through trail maintenance. He prevented human trampling by discouraging casual visitors. This meadow is a time capsule of what alpine ecosystems looked like before heavy recreation pressure." Rachel walked back to the table. Her hands rested on the journal. His actual legacy is not the money or the cabin or even this journal. It is this ecosystem. He preserved something rare. He just could not preserve his relationship with me. Those two facts can both be true. Rebecca understood what Rachel was offering. Not forgiveness by forgetting, forgiveness by accepting that people are complicated, and failures in one area do not negate achievements in another. And sometimes the best you can do is honor what someone protected, even if what they protected was not you. "I want to establish a formal research station here." Rachel's words came faster now, more certain. Not just summer visits, an actual program through Oregon State. "I will bring graduate students every year. We will document the ecology, create baseline data for climate change research, publish papers that cite this location as a protected reference site. In exchange, I will fund your trail maintenance work. I will work with the Forest Service to get this area designated as a research natural area. Protected status, no logging, no mining, no development, Ever. You would do that? My father loved this place more than he loved people. Rachel's voice was steady now, no bitterness left in it. I cannot change that. I am done being angry about it. But I can make sure what he loved matters, that it contributes to science, that his 13 years meant something beyond his own solitude. What about the money? You are legally entitled to it. I do not want it. Use it however Thomas intended. Give it to someone who needs mountains the way you both needed them. The formal agreement came together over the next month. Rachel worked with Oregon State's legal department. Gary Young reviewed the contracts. The Forest Service approved the Research Natural Area Designation contingent on annual research reports and public access to published data. The structure was simple. Rebecca remained property owner and resident steward. Rachel became research director. OSU provided liability insurance and equipment grants. The Forest Service waived Rebecca's $800 annual permit fee in exchange for research access and data sharing. OSU paid Rebecca $12,000 annually as resident researcher and facility manager. With her guiding business scaled back to 4 trips per summer instead of 6, her total income stabilized around $28,000 per year, more than she needed, more than she had ever expected. Thomas's $31,000 sat untouched in the metal cabinet like a question waiting for an answer. Rebecca sat at the wooden table one evening in late September and made a decision. She would create the Hendricks Wilderness Scholarship, $2,000 annually for students from low-income backgrounds pursuing careers in forestry ecology, rangeland management, or wilderness conservation. The principal, invested conservatively, would generate enough interest to fund the scholarship indefinitely. She called Rachel to propose it. Rachel was quiet for a long moment after Rebecca explained. I will match your contribution. Rachel's voice carried something Rebecca had not heard before. Not quite warmth, but its cousin. $30,000 from me, $61,000 total principal. That funds 3 or 4 students annually in perpetuity. The first recipient was selected in November. Catherine Blackstone, 19 years old, Northern Cheyenne Nation, from Lame Deer, Montana. Accepted to University of Montana Forestry Program, but struggling to afford books and equipment and the gear required for field courses. Catherine wrote to Rebecca, "Your story gave me permission to want what I want. I thought I was the only person who felt pulled toward wild places and did not know how to explain it to my family." Rebecca invited Catherine to visit the cabin during winter break. Catherine arrived on a cold December morning, carrying a pack that looked too heavy and wearing boots that looked too new. Rebecca recognized both immediately. "You borrowed that pack. My cousin's. How did you know? Because I borrowed mine too. Come inside. We will fix the weight distribution before you hurt your shoulders." They spent 5 days together. Rebecca taught Catherine winter survival techniques, how to read snow for avalanche danger, how to build emergency shelters, how to navigate when trails disappeared under snow, how to distinguish between being uncomfortable and being in danger. Catherine absorbed everything with the intensity of someone who had been waiting her whole life for permission to learn these skills. On the 3rd evening, she asked the question Rebecca had been expecting. "My family thinks I am crazy for studying forestry. They want me to be a nurse or a teacher, something practical. Does that get easier?" Rebecca considered her answer carefully. "It does not get easier, but it gets clearer. You learn to trust that wanting something other people do not understand is not a flaw. It is just who you are. How do you explain it to them? You do not. You just keep going. Eventually, they see that you are happy. That is the only explanation that matters. Catherine was quiet for a while. Then, this is the first place I have been where I do not have to explain why I want to be alone in the mountains. Rebecca saw herself at 19 in Catherine, lost, pulled toward wilderness, thinking the wanting was wrong because nobody else seemed to want it. And Rebecca realized something she had not understood before. Thomas had seen himself in Rebecca. That was why he trusted the mountains to choose. The mountains send people who need them, and those people teach the next ones. The cycle continues not because anyone plans it, but because wildness recognizes its own. Rebecca wrote in her journal that night, 3 years ago I was homeless in Seattle. 2 years ago I fought the Forest Service and Thomas's daughter for the right to stay here. Last year I built a business. This year I taught a scholarship student how to read snow, and she told me I changed her life. Thomas was right. Mountains keep their promises. They promised me a place where I could be completely alone and completely myself. They delivered. Now they are asking me to do what Thomas could not connect with people without losing the wildness. I think I can do both. I have to, because the next Rebecca, the next Catherine, the next lost 19-year-old who needs to know this place exists, they are counting on me to keep the door open. Summer of year 3 brought visitors in quantities Rebecca had not anticipated. Kenneth Wright returned to purchase 3 more maps she agreed to sell. $8,000 that went directly into the scholarship fund. Gary Young stopped by with updated permit paperwork and a bottle of whiskey he said was for celebrating 3 years of not getting evicted by the federal government. Ronald Clark made his annual visit a tradition, now bringing stories about Thomas and questions about whether Rebecca was taking care of herself. Rachel arrived with 8 graduate students and more equipment, and a publication list that showed the research station was generating real scientific output. Climate change impacts on alpine plant phenology, elk grazing patterns in protected versus unprotected areas, baseline biodiversity inventories for long-term monitoring. Catherine came back as a research assistant sophomore year, now carrying herself with more confidence than she had in December. She helped the graduate students set up plots and collect data and asked questions that showed she was learning. Jake Morrison appeared one afternoon in July without warning. Rebecca was splitting firewood when she heard boots on the trail. She reached for the axe defensively before recognizing him. I wanted to see the place that saved my life. Rebecca leaned the axe against the woodpile. You saved your own life by having enough sense left to keep walking when I found you. Still, Jake looked around the clearing the way people look at places that have significance beyond their physical properties. I have been thinking about that day a lot, about how close I came, about what you did. I brought you something. He held out a package. Inside was a book, a first edition of Jack London's collected works, properly bound, pages crisp. The inscription read, "For the ranger who reminded me that wilderness is not our enemy. It is our teacher. We just have to stay alive long enough to learn the lessons." Rebecca accepted it with the awkwardness of someone who did not know how to receive gifts. This must have cost money. It did. Consider it tuition for a lesson I needed to learn. Amanda Robinson arrived in early August with a notebook and a camera and credentials from outside magazine. She had heard about Rebecca through Forest Service channels. The district newsletter had mentioned the Research Natural Area designation and the resident steward who maintained trails and provided search and rescue support, and apparently lived year-round in a cabin that most people considered uninhabitable. I want to write a feature. The Last Ranger, how a homeless 21-year-old bought a mountain for $10. Rebecca's immediate response was no. I do not want to be famous. I want to be left alone. Amanda did not argue. She sat on the porch and drank coffee and waited. After an hour, Rebecca spoke. If I agree, you cannot publish exact coordinates. You have to focus on conservation message. You have to let me approve the final draft. Amanda agreed to all three conditions. They spent 5 days together. Amanda asked questions. Rebecca gave answers that revealed more than she intended because Amanda was good at her job and knew how to make silence uncomfortable enough that people filled it with honesty. What is the most important thing you have learned living here? Rebecca thought about this while they hiked up to the lookout tower. That being alone is not the same as being lonely, and that every place that pulls at you is pulling at someone else too. The trick is figuring out how to share it without destroying what makes it worth sharing. Do you think you will stay here forever? I used to think that was the goal. Find the perfect place and never leave. Now, I think the goal is to take care of it until the next person needs it. Could be me for 50 years. Could be someone else in 10. The mountains will decide. What would you say to Thomas Hendricks if you could talk to him? Rebecca stopped walking. They were at the lookout tower base. She looked up at the structure standing against the sky. Thank you for trusting me, and I am sorry you could not trust people the way you trusted mountains. But I understand why. People are unpredictable and mountains are constant. But I am trying to do better than you did. I am keeping the cabin. I am keeping the research going. I am keeping the scholarship running. But I am also answering the door when people knock. Because maybe that is the lesson. Mountains are big enough for all of us if we take care of them together. Amanda wrote everything down. When she left, she promised to send a draft before publication. Rebecca believed her because you either trusted people or you did not, and Rebecca was learning slowly to trust. Fall arrived with aspens turning gold, and the first snow dusting the high peaks, and the understanding that year 3 was ending and year 4 would begin, and the pattern would continue, because patterns continue until something breaks them, and nothing was breaking. Rebecca stood in the cabin one evening in late October and opened the metal cabinet. She pulled out the leather portfolio containing Thomas's letter. She added pages to it, her own letter, written in the same careful handwriting she used for trail reports and financial ledgers and journal entries that documented not just what she did, but why it mattered. To whoever finds this cabin next, my name is Rebecca Claire Torres. I bought this property for $10 at county tax auction on November 12th, 2023. I found Thomas Hendricks's letter and his money on my first day here. I was 21, homeless and lost. 3 years later, I am 24, housed and found. Thomas trusted mountains to send someone. They sent me. And I am trusting them to send you whenever you are ready. I do not know when I will leave this place. maybe never, maybe tomorrow. Life is unpredictable, but whenever I go here is what you are inheriting. The practical details. Property tax is $340 annually, due December 31st to Custer County. Special use permit is currently waived due to Research Natural Area designation, but maintain good relationship with Forest Service. Roof last inspected 2025, good for 15 more years. Spring water tested clean, annually documentation in cabinet. Lookout tower is safe, but do not climb in winds over 30 miles per hour. Solar system has 240-watt panels, replace batteries every 7 years. The legacy. This cabin is part of Hendricks Alpine Research Station. Contact information for Dr. Rachel Hendricks is in the cabinet. You are not required to continue this, but I hope you will. The Hendricks Wilderness Scholarship funds students who need wild places. Details in cabinet. The remaining map collection is worth approximately $95,000. It belongs with the cabin. Thomas's journal is here. Read it. It will help you understand why this place exists. What I learned. Places do not belong to people. People belong to places. Being alone is a gift only if you are willing to share it when it matters. Mountains keep their promises, but only if you keep yours. Take care of the land, the building, and the people who need this place. You will recognize them when you meet them. They are the ones who walked 14 miles to get here. My promise to you. If you are reading this, you bought the cabin legally, which means you faced the same question I faced. Is this real? Can I actually do this? Am I allowed to want this? Yes, you can. You are. The mountains chose you. Trust them. Rebecca Claire Torres, November 12, 2026. 3 years to the day. She folded the letter and placed it in the portfolio beside Thomas's. 2 letters now. 2 people who had found this place and been found by it. The pattern continuing. The final evening of year 3, Rebecca climbed the lookout tower. She had climbed it many times now, but tonight felt different. Ceremonial somehow. The sun was setting behind the western ridge, the valley filled with that particular quality of light that only happens in mountains when the sun drops below the peaks, but the sky above remains bright. She stood in the cab and looked out at 80 miles of wilderness in every direction. Below, Rachel and her students were breaking down research equipment for the season. Catherine was helping them, moving with the competence of someone who had found her place. Smoke rose from the cabin chimney where a fire Rebecca had built earlier was keeping the structure warm for the students who would sleep inside tonight before hiking out tomorrow. Rebecca thought about her mother. Linda would have understood eventually. Maybe she always had. Maybe she knew what kind of person Rebecca was going to be from the beginning, and simply hoped that the world would be gentler with her than it usually is with people who do not fit. The world had not been gentle, but Rebecca had not needed gentle. She had needed remote. She had needed difficult. She had needed a place that other people had given up on, because giving up was a privilege of people who had options. She thought about Thomas. He had been right to trust the mountains. Wrong about almost everything else, but right about that. The mountains chose her. They chose Catherine. They would choose whoever came next. The choosing happened not through magic or destiny, but through the simple mathematics of need meeting availability. People who needed wilderness found it when they looked hard enough. The wilderness had been here all along, waiting. A raven called from a distant ridge. The sound carried impossibly far in the thin evening air. Rebecca called back. Her voice echoed off granite walls and came back to her transformed no longer quite her voice, but something that belonged to the valley as much as to her. Mountains keep promises. They had promised her a place where she could be completely alone and completely herself. They had delivered exactly that, and then they had asked more of her. They had asked her to do what Thomas could not, to build community without losing solitude, to teach without diminishing wildness, to share without destroying what made the sharing worthwhile. She had done it, was still doing it, would keep doing it until the mountains decided otherwise. The sky above the western ridge turned from gold to rose to purple. Stars began appearing in the darkening east. The temperature dropped as the sun's heat left the valley. Rebecca stood in the lookout tower and watched day become night and felt something close to contentment, which was as close to happiness as she had ever needed to get. If this story meant something to you, tell us in the comments. What is pulling at you? What is your mountain? What are you walking toward? And if you have already found your place, how did you know? How did the mountains choose you? Rebecca's story continues. She is still there, 14 miles from the nearest road, taking care of a cabin that took care of her. The mountains are still calling. They always are. The question is whether you are willing to walk far enough to answer. Subscribe for more stories like this. Stories about people who choose hard things because easy things do not satisfy them. Stories about wild places and the people wild places choose. See you on the next trail.